Are you aware of how you are defining yourself? Are you willing to sit with this and think about it? It's not fair for me to ask you to do something that I won't do. Yes, it's time for me to get real with myself and others about the role of my created selves. Hi, it's Margaret Meloni, and welcome to Season 3 of the Death Dhamma podcast. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so appreciative that you are part of my community. And yet, I seek not to be attached to the idea of the podcast or even to the idea of our community. And that's our topic this season: attachment, clinging, and aversion. What happens when we really want something? What happens when we really don't want something? And what does it do to our suffering and dissatisfaction? Let's dive in and find out a little bit more with today's episode. This week, I open up my attachment journal and I look at 2 times where I created versions of myself and how I realized those versions were no longer appropriate. And when I say 2 times that I know of course, there have been much more than those 2. Today, I share the 2 that have come to mind over the last couple of weeks as we have been considering attachment to self. After I finished my introduction, one of my students called out, "Margaret, we don't care whether or not you are still technical or not. We care that you can teach us project management." Some of you who are here with me now know that outside of our time together sharing Death Dhamma, I work as an instructor. And yes, I teach project management. At first, I didn't know how to receive that statement, but later I realized that it was very helpful and freeing. I had been carrying around this story about how I used to work in technology and how I used to be a computer programmer, and I thought I needed to hang on to this and bring it out each time I was teaching a group of people who came from engineering or information technology, as if they wouldn't accept me if we did not have at least that thing in common of being somewhat technical. Me being somewhat technical. They were still very technical. And what that student was teaching me was, it doesn't matter who you were, it matters who you are. Was I the right person to teach them the knowledge and skills that they wanted to acquire? I did not need to show any of them that I had street cred in other areas other than helping them to become better project managers. I did not need to establish common ground based on my past. I could build rapport with them by sharing my knowledge and helping them combine that with their current demands and experiences so that they could walk away with a new and improved skill set. That is what mattered. After that day, I definitely changed how I reached out to my students and how I introduced myself. And it's not that I never mentioned my past experience, but I worked to only use it when it would contribute to their learning experience. For example, discussing lessons learned from previous projects, or dealing with conflicts with others, or supporting team members with problem solving. I won't say that I never mentioned that I used to be a computer programmer. I just try to ensure that when I do, there is a reason, and that reason is to help in communicating with others, not to make myself feel more secure. Because really, that is what I was doing. I was hanging on to this old role in order to feel secure with new groups of people, to be accepted by them, to feel like I belong. And now I realize I don't need to cling to my past self in order to accomplish this. But I needed to be called out, right? So the turning point was when this student kind of called me out and said, "Hey, basically what he was saying is like, we don't care about that story about who you were. We care about, are you the right person to be in the room with us right now?" And so I had to walk away and really think about what that person said and what it really meant, and then integrate that with the fact that, yeah, I was drawing on my past a lot. And I was thinking that by drawing on that past and keeping that past version of myself alive, that it was in some way meaningful. And it was fake, in a sense, not fake. I mean, I used to be that, but I was no longer a computer programmer, and that was no longer my job. And it didn't matter if I could be hands-on technical anymore, because that isn't what I was there to do. But yet somehow there was part of me that was, having a hard time letting go. And that hard time letting go was really about the insecurity of being accepted in a new role. And so I was dragging around this old computer programmer self. And, so this student of mine really kind of jarred me into realizing, oh, I'm not that anymore. I need to let go of that. And so I began to work on letting go of that, and really thinking about, as I started to talk to a group of students, really think about what am I saying and why am I saying it and who is it really helping? Who is it really helping? And so that was something that helped me let go of that constructed self. Because, I didn't need that past self. I needed my current self, which granted, sure, that's another construction, right? Margaret is the project management teacher. But I needed to use that self conventionally to help my students. And that's what I was there for. So that was a very interesting experience. And as I journal and just thinking in life, as often is the case with me, sometimes I really need that push to move, to let go of something or to move forward with something. Well, I promised you 2 examples of creating a version of self that needed to be acknowledged and released. This second one is all about the self of someone who was a loving partner to someone else, being a wife to my husband, and even being a daughter to my parents, and what that meant. What does it mean when you have this part of yourself that is built around your relationship with someone, and then that person dies, right? After my husband died, I know I was confronted with my own attachments. I missed him. I missed our life together. I missed the future I had also, let's use the word again, constructed, right? I had built this future in my mind of what we were going to do and how things were going to be. And in some ways, I didn't know who I was. What was helpful was that my entire life had not been about being his caretaker. There was at least a part of myself that retained some continuity. I still grappled with who I was and what my life would be, and I needed to think of myself in a different way. I mean, so now we're, talking about the impermanence of self and attachment and all of those things, right? So when we have that deep emotional connection with someone like I did, and I'm sure you do with people around you, that becomes a part of yourself. So this was a deep part of my sense of self. And then that person was gone, and I felt like part of myself was missing. In fact, I remember thinking that how I felt was as if I had been cut in half. I felt like I had been cut in half, and not cut in half horizontally, cut in half vertically, so that it just felt like nothing was complete and nothing was working. So when someone dies, so like the fact that my husband died, it doesn't mean that I was not his partner. Or if a friend dies, it doesn't mean you weren't a friend or, a sibling or a child. You were. And I was. But now I was something different, right? So when he was alive, part of myself, my constructed self, was in relationship, in context to him and to our relationship. And when he died, that context changed. And it's a difficult but necessary process to let go of who you are in relationship to someone who has died. It's also, it was an opportunity to rediscover myself. Not that I think I was that appreciative of it. I recognized it. I recognized that the more I was clinging to what I thought I was or who I wanted to be, the more I would suffer. But I don't know how excited I was about, rediscovering myself. However, that's where I was, and that's what I believed needed to happen, right? And so any of us, we can use this time to reflect on our values, interests, and goals without the influence of the person you have lost. This is a shift in perspective, and it can be transformative, and it can help you grow and evolve as an individual. I hope that that's what happened for me. I don't know. I certainly was never the kind of person who would get on a podcast and have share the kind of things, private, personal things that I'm sharing with all of you now. So there's some change, right? And it doesn't have to be something like that. It could be just something like watching movies that you would never watch together because you both didn't like it, or eating food that you always wanted to eat, but your partner didn't like or was allergic to. And it takes time. It takes time. I know that, at least for the first few months, a glaring example to me is my late husband loved to drink Welch's grape juice. So always we had Welch's grape juice. And of course, when he died, there was still Welch's grape juice in the refrigerator. But then a few months later, there was still Welch's grape juice, but it was a new bottle. And I had to realize, why are you buying this grape juice and drinking it? This isn't for you. Drinking Welch's grape juice isn't part of who you are. It's part of who he was. So it's just really a journey of learning who you are and what are you doing and what are you hanging on to. So in a way, that wasn't even just hanging on to myself. It was hanging on to the self of someone who was no longer there with me, right? Now, along the way, I didn't throw away my complete sense of self. And as you go through something like this, you won't either. A strong sense of self can be a source of strength, definitely, So there's the conventional reason for us to have a sense of who we are. And it helps us, and it can help with strength. Leaning on my professional self was helpful to me. It gave me something familiar, something that felt stable when the grief was intense. Working helped me take little pockets of time and leave the grief aside while I was able to focus on work. That's not necessarily true for everyone. That's what was true for me. Your sense of self can help you remember the person you lost and the memories that you shared, definitely. Your sense of self can give you the strength to move forward and find meaning in your life. In fact, I had a little mantra I used to recite that helped me, which was, I'm not the one who died. So that was a reminder to me that there was this self, Margaret, who was still here and who needed to continue living and build a life, and that there was no reason for me not to move forward and find a way to build a happy life, right? So your sense of self is dynamic and adaptable. I found new ways to rebuild and move forward. You can too. I wasn't completely reinvented. It wasn't a complete reinvention. So even let's go back to the example of I used to be a computer programmer, and then I became a project and program manager, and then I, became a teacher and all those things. So each of those constructed selves along the career path there, they weren't complete reinventions. There were still key parts of me that existed, so to speak, in each of those selves, and one built on another. And the same has been true as I've looked at how to be me and how to let go of that self of, I'm this person's partner, which, it took time. I don't even know when to tell you exactly that came about. I would say the first time that I felt like I had a day where I was easing into my new normal it probably was about a year. I'm just telling you that conversationally, everyone's journey is different, right? So, but along the way, whether it's through change of career, loss of a loved one, breakup of a relationship, a move, you don't have to completely reinvent yourself. You're going to draw on your old self to develop a new sense of self. It's just that the more that you hang on to that old role, computer programmer, spouse, child, friend, sibling, the more that you will suffer. And even as you move forward and you create your next version of self, remember, this is something we are doing conventionally to help ourselves navigate this world. We also want to, while we navigate this world conventionally, remember that so many of the things around us that we are clinging to are actually not really who we are. So at the end of the day, teacher, podcaster, author, whatever it is I think I am, none of those things are actually really me. They are things that I do, right? And if something happens and I am no longer able to do the podcast, I need to learn not to cling to that, because that's what's going to cause suffering, right? So, yes, know who you are. Understand when it's time to let go of a version of yourself. And know that the more you try to stay in control, the harder it will be. I would love to hear from you, your thoughts, your suggestions, your own stories about attachment. So follow this link, I'm going to read it to you in a minute here, to leave me a 90-second message with your ideas and suggestions. You can go to https://www.speakpipe.com/death_Dhamma_podcast. I suppose you could also just use your favorite search engine to say SpeakPipe Death Dhamma podcast. And there you can record an audio message for me. And be sure to come over to margaretmeloni.com. That's MargaretMeloni.com and join the community. You've been listening to the Death Dhamma podcast with your host, Margaret Meloni. Thank you so much for being here. Come find me on margaretmeloni.com, MargaretMeloni.com. And until we meet again, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be at ease, and may you be free from suffering. Bye for now.